Hello and welcome to Talk Truth. My name is Corey Huntsberger. I've got my father, Alan Huntsberger, in the studio. And we're going to start off with our foundational verse because we're going to need it after today's conversation. The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord. They don't belong to Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, Mark Carney, the liberals, or even the conservatives. Might as well throw them in. Everything belongs to the Lord, for he laid its foundation on the seas and established it on the rivers. Psalm 24, 1 and 2. Important verse, Alan, especially with today's conversation, but people need to get that in their head. I know it's in mine. Is it in yours every single day?
Definitely, and particularly today, because today I read the book of Lamentations. And Lamentations is a book that many think Jeremiah is the author, but we don't know for sure. But no, whoever wrote it, obviously was from God. It's the inspired word of God, and it talks about what happened to Israel, Judah, and Jerusalem when they stopped serving and following the Lord God Almighty. And I just want to read a couple things. It says, Judah has gone into exile following affliction and harsh slavery. She lives among the nations and finds no place to rest. All her pursuers have overtaken her in narrow places. Her adversaries have become her masters. Her enemies are at ease. For the Lord has made her suffer because of her many transgressions. Her children have gone away as captives before the adversary. So the question is,
Yeah.
if the earth and everything in it and the world belongs to the Lord, and we as Canadians make our free will choice and decide not to go the Lord's route, judgment will come.
Mm.
And if he was willing to judge Jerusalem, Israel, Judah in a very harsh way, read Lamentations, then that can happen to us because we as believers are said to be God's people, his possession. And so carrying the thought that God has been pushing me into, Corey, when the earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord. And therefore, those of us that are believers have got to quit playing quote unquote politics with our Christian way of life and get serious
Mm.
and get to the place where if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves.
Yeah. Boy, that's good. That's really good. Scary, but like a loving father disciplining a child who doesn't listen. That's kind of the situation we find ourselves in. Someone knows a little bit about the situation we're in, according to the Davos, the World Economic Forum, and even Mark Carney, is Teddy Pierce. Teddy Pierce, welcome back to the show, man. We really appreciate you.
Hey, thank you so much for having me back.
Teddy, Klaus Schwab recently stepped down, I guess is the proper way, a nice way of saying it, from the World Economic Forum. Something that he started up, I think, in the 1970s. He's been there forever. He's worked really hard. They're at the peak, I think, of in the news and the conversation and the globalists taking over and making a big, massive move. I want to know from you a little bit about what your thoughts are. How do you interpret, this shift in leadership and him stepping down? What does it mean?
Yeah, seems to be a little bit of a shocking announcement. That seems like he has a few more years in the tank to exact his vision that he has been doing since the early 70s. Really, what I've been commenting on though continually is, when the management changes over their staff, when they replace their field general, it may not necessarily be a cause for celebration. And of course, the interim chair right now is Peter Breivik. It's an Austrian name. I never can get it right, but Breivik Lamantha, I think. He's the former CEO of Nestle, who doesn't think that humans have a basic right and access to water. That I guess he got to where he sold enough bottled water, he thought he should just be able to regulate that too. And so I think what we're seeing is with Klaus Schwab being swapped out, and we have the interim, we don't know who the new leader is going to be, but it's never a time where things recede or go to a different place of normalcy. I think what we're going to see is the installment of some younger blood, so a newer person who's probably uh, may not necessarily have the experience and acumen of a Klaus Schwab, but they're going to have all of the signposts of carrying this wokeism, this globalist agenda into the 21st century. And so, in a very similar way with Nancy Pelosi, the stalwart progressive of the House of Representatives, stepping down, who did we see come in her stead was Hakeem Jeffries of New York, who, he says the quiet part out loud. He actually is a modern progressive. And so the changing of the guard is this opportunity to really leap forward in taking maybe what was on the fringe or on the edges of the movement and putting it right in the center and in the mainstream. So that's what I would be looking out for, is really this is an opportunity to carry the revolution forward and maybe see the revolution come to its glorious end.
Don't you think that the reason why he got kicked out was that the revolution is collapsing? That the wokeism is beginning to collapse, basically, largely to do with the leadership of Donald Trump down in the United States, but it's beginning to collapse. There's holes coming out. People are beginning to rise up and say, "We've had enough. We're not going to take any more of this garbage." This DEI stuff, this wokeism. Don't you think part of it is what Klaus Schwab has been working at all these years is actually crumbling?
Well, in large part, we're talking about some folks here who have some wild ambitions that most normal people don't have, and that's a good thing. But they're looking at the cultural chaos that they're causing. That's just one aspect of their program. So I think you're absolutely right that we're seeing this social and cultural pushback. Trump obviously is the persona non grata of all of the different leaders in these various countries with their different sovereignty movements. Uh, with the breakdown of that, though, I think I really do believe that we can see a pivot where they may pivot off of that uh, because the wokeism, all of the modern gender ideology stuff, it's to create cultural chaos, and it is to invert what used to be the Western and Christian world order and just invert that on its head. And the sake is for destabilization, right? And so I think they can dial back the cultural destabilization a little bit if they think that that's going to help them overall in their plans. But certainly the economic machine that they have so much control over, this global economy, and then of course the way that they manipulate governments, and of course Canada is no stranger to their global manipulation with their politicians. You can see that this change in tactic may be something where they dial back the cultural stuff and really put the foot on the gas in ways that they can gain more political control.
Can you give us some examples of what that would look like, Teddy? Like how, they're really aggressive now. How much more
Mhm.
aggressive do you think they can get with a new leader?
Well, they can work in several different ways. Dialing the cultural stuff back, just saying, "Hey, let's get back to some sort of moderate sounding position. Like we're not going to criminalize any of this, but the government's not going to just continue to pound us with DEI initiatives and wokeism." And then at the same time, we might see something along the lines of needing to have a UN initiative, say, of we're having these world conflicts. We really need to dial in this world conflict, and we're all going to have to come together and figure out a solution and and really work on this on a global scale. And of course, what they're going to do there is just backdoor these things where the UN, much like they did during COVID, they tried to loop the world into having to listen to the World Health Organization when it came to any perceived emergency. It'll be something like that where they're really starting to work in the background in policy and nice sounding things. They're perfect at naming something. Like, if you vote no on this bill, you hate puppies. That's the act. That's the name of the act. But then when you actually look at it, it's a total stealing of your individual freedom and sovereignty. So I think that's really where it'll come, and that's a lot easier to do, to manipulate in the background under nice sounding names. And
Yeah,
it's just a little too policy wonk and esoteric for most people to really see what they're doing.
yeah. Interesting you bring that up. Can you? And maybe there's only a few, but the ones I know is the key words they use a lot. It's for your safety, for your
Yes.
safety, and also like you're the problem. Meaning like you're gonna kill my grandmother if you don't get vaxxed. You hate puppies and you're gonna kill the puppies if you don't do this. Are those the two main key kind of things people should keep their ears open when they're listening to a lot of policies, a lot of leaders around the world? Because there seems to be a pattern, like build back better. You know what I mean? They were all
Right.
using that terminology. Are there any other ways and terminologies that you know of that they use to manipulate people?
Well, yeah, one of the ones that they love to use here in America to kind of erode the concept of our Second Amendment is, it's just common sense gun legislation. It's just common sense. And then, of course, it's just a continual redefinition of what's an assault thing and what's a this and what's a that, and to the point where, they've overridden the freedom to begin with through lawfare and the legislative process. So common sense is a really good one. The other thing, though, that you'll see is when you see the legacy media, they're really good at parroting the same talking points over and over. But it's a little harder. It's not necessarily a direct line. But what you often see is selling the idea that we need more legislation, we need another law, we need more regulation. All of these things are always sold to us as just uh, the logical common sense conclusion all the time. It's only the kooky and crazy people who would dare think that climate change is not an existential threat to the planet. And so when you start seeing this kind of narrative building, and all it is trying to say, it's just trying to take that moral high ground and say, we know best. We're the experts, we're the adults in the room. And if you don't really go along with our program, it's from some childish ideological position that, and you need to be set at the little kids' table while the adults come make policy decisions. And you see that a lot, especially in the climate debate. And even in this modern gender conversation that we're continually having, where we're in a total contradiction, where we are women, hear us roar, but we can't really define what that is. And by the way, if you decide to define that, then all of a sudden you're an exclusionary radical, and all of these things. And so I always say this: you're dealing with somebody who's abusing you. They're using their weapons, political, cultural, and economic weapons, to abuse you. And the point is never the point. And that's why they contradict each other all the time, because it's effective they're going to do whatever they can. They're going to say whatever they have to say to keep this system of abuse going. And they may bring us flowers one day, like we talked about earlier, with dialing back some of this stuff to bring a sense of normalcy. But that's all it's for, is just to keep the system going and keep us trapped inside of it.
Teddy, you nailed it. You and I have not talked about this, but I said this a few shows ago. Alan agreed with me 100%. You nailed it right there. We are in an abusive relationship. That's exactly what it is with someone who abuses their spouse. Like, I love you, I care for you, you're so important to me. In one hand, and on the other side, they're like beating you, cheating on you, you know what I mean, lying to you, cussing you out. We have experienced verbal abuse, physical abuse, spiritual abuse, you know what I mean, emotional abuse. We are in an abusive relationship, and it's hard to talk to someone who's in an abusive relationship to convince them to leave, because they then make
Yeah.
excuses. No, they're a good guy. No, they really care. They just had a bad day. I was a bad spouse. I should have had the meal ready when they entered the door. Whatever. I agree with you 100%. It is an abusive relationship. And that is the mental effect I see on all the people who say this is good for us, or we should listen, or you're right, I'm bad, or whatever. It's like, what are you talking about? This guy's a moron. He's a loser. Your government is a moron. They're losers and they're abusing you. And we cannot get the people to listen at all because they're just stuck in that abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. And, exactly to your point, it becomes if it's three people, one of them's the abuser and the other feels abused and wants to placate that person just to quiet things down and try to maintain a sense of normalcy. Then it becomes 2 on 1, and the person that's willing to speak the truth and call the things out, well, now they seem like someone who's crazy and on the fringe, right? And
Yeah.
so we definitely have to get to a point where we get enough people, enough critical mass of people who are uh, get past that point of wanting to placate these people. I said before, offline, but there are people like the Bushes and the Mitt Romneys of the world, and in American politics, and they're ostensibly a part of the right, or the political right, but they end up just going along with liberal modernity every time in this slow march leftward. And I think that's really where we've been for so long. But you know we live in interesting times. We live in times where this plan for global domination is accelerating. They understand that that they can't let that critical mass build up. And that's why we're seeing the level of gaslighting. We're seeing 100% negative coverage of anybody who's outside of their system and daring to say anything else. So it'll be very interesting as we push towards the end of the decade. That's their plan to reset the world in their image by 2030. That's directly from the World Economic Forum, not from a conspiracy theorist fever dream. So it'll be very interesting to see what carrots and sticks come up and what manipulations are put on, especially in the political realm. And for us here in the United States, the midterms are going to be crazy. 2028, I think, is going to be a signature battle, and it's really going to help divide and create this ideology. We live in an ideological divide, and it's two worldviews of what the future is, and they could not be more opposite of each other.
Mm.
And I think that's going to really come to the fore in 2028. But hey, we've got to keep speaking the truth and waking people up to it.
The interesting thing is, I think that, from what I'm experiencing, and it seems to be that we still think that there is two different things: politics and religion. We
Mm.
we don't we continually really believe that they should not be mixed, that they are two separate things, and if you're trying to mix them, then that's where you get into trouble. And so you have Bible studies that won't allow you to talk about politics at all. We have things that are going on, evil things that are going on in our world from a political point of view, that will not be preached against or talked about in our churches. We seem to, I'm praying that we get to the place where we believe that the earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants, belong to the Lord. But, that all sounds good, but now let's break it down into everyday living. And are we prepared to cross that gulf that has always been between the differences between the two? And so you can't separate the two. You actually can't separate the two. How you are as a government is how you think of who you are as a believer, as a Christian. And you can't separate the two. So even me saying that's probably going to get criticized,
No.
because we think that no, those two things are separate and we got to keep them separate.
Right. Well, you have to understand it, especially when you're in a political conflict, but certainly if you're in a war, we're dealing with fifth generation warfare. And this idea of the separation of church and state, as it's, enumerated in a letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Dansbury Baptists, it's not in the Constitution or the Declaration, but that was really, really pushed by what I call liberal modernity in the book. I talk about modern liberalism. As the cultural movement of the '60s, it was this injection of a new animating spirit, and they really pushed the separation of church and state. Uh, and it was a tactic. It's a psychological tactic to tell Christians that they are not allowed to bring their religion. But this is spoken by true progressives. I mean, true believers whose politics are their theology. They're certainly bringing their theological views and premises and arguments into the political square, into the political sphere. And so uh, Christians really need to wake up and be very mindful of that, because that's what we're dealing with. You're being told to shut up by the people who totally plan to bring their theological vision into reality and make it your political reality.
And one way that we've seen that very loud and clear is, the whole transgenderism thing that they have tried to bring in to the schools and start teaching our children at 4 years old,
Mhm.
and start, brainwashing them, if you want to put it that way, so that they all believe the way you believe. Now, if a Christian did that and brought in Christianity into the schools like that, there would be loud screams of what's going on here, the difference between separation of church and state. You're absolutely right. Christians have got to wake up, because the other
Yeah.
side is more than happy to preach their doctrine.
Absolutely.
Hey, Teddy, I want to ask you. We got like 3 minutes left. We just had an election here in Canada. Mark Carney, got voted in or reelected, however you want to call it. What do you know about Mark Carney, his role in the WEF? We know like he's heavy on climate change, and we know that he knows it's a moneymaker, has nothing to do to actually help save the environment. What do you know, because you're in America, about Mark Carney and his World Economic Forum involvement and what that means for Canada?
Well, yeah, you guys replaced a communist globalist for a communist globalist, but this one's into international banking. So I know that his involvement with the World Economic Forum, he's been to summits, different activists basically giving a lot of TED Talks on behalf of the vision that is laid out by the World Economic Forum for a one world government. And of course, coming with that, anybody that comes from international banking would love to consolidate things and bring about, say something like a central bank digital currency. Uh, with Mark Carney, I'm sorry, I guess is the best thing I can say to you folks there in Canada. But what you'll see is a level of ideological alignment that's going to continue, maybe be even more. Uh, he's going to be more in lockstep with the World Economic Forum than even like a Justin Trudeau, if you can believe it. I think that's what we're probably going to see, and a real push, like you said, for the climate initiatives, which it hurts banks, it hurts their ability to loan money, but it does help them set up the environmental and social governance scores for different companies and get them on line with their objectives. So I don't know. We'll see, but it was kind of a joke to say that he was an outsider in any kind of way. He's very much an insider and willing to play cabal.
Well, I think if anyone's going to push the central bank digital currency now on a nation, it'll be Mark Carney, especially with his background in banking. Do you think that's a possibility as well?
I think so. I think what they would need to do is a great reset type event. And I think we talked about that the last time. It's, some real call for international unity like we haven't seen before. Uh, I don't know if that's going to be a feigned or a real natural disaster, or whatever that is. I think that that would be a huge push, and at that point, you don't have a better cheerleader than Mark Carney to get Canada on board with, with a mandatory United Nations, a CBDC, and a this eventual goal, right? Their eventual goal is this soft coup, for us to never really, for everyone to really never know that the gate shut on us, and our countries are all still named the same, but we live in this mandatory system, and they're the rule by expert class, who get to tell us how to live.
Yeah. Well, Teddy, I really appreciate your expertise. You got a book out there called Dethrone Davos, Save America. I'd throw it in there, Save Canada as well. Really appreciate you.
Yes.
People can get it on Amazon. And thank you so much for being here. We're definitely going to have you back. This conversation is not going to go anywhere. I agree with, and people don't know what you're talking about. Go and watch our show, our first show with Teddy. How that they could do a central digital currency is give you your tax refunds, but you got to sign up for the digital currency, or any kind of rebates, or there's a natural disaster, we're willing to help your company, but you can only get your funds through the digital currency. They're going to do it in a sneaky way. Seems convenient. Everything else seems inconvenient. Yeah, we're understanding the mind game, and we really appreciate you keeping it on top of things, and we'll definitely have you back.
Well, hey, it's always great to be on. Thank you so much.
Well, there you have it, Alan. Fun conversation. And again, if you're feeling fear, we don't want people to feel fear, right?
No,
You want them to
nothing
feel
to be
what?
afraid of. We want you to feel joy because you have a God that is in control, and draw near to him. Draw near to God. If you haven't really been serious about God, get our book called The Living Stone.
Yep.
It's going to help you develop a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and start drawing near to God. Our answer is drawing close to the Lord. And
Amen.
the more you do that, the more you will be encouraged, and courage will become a part of who you are.
You want to help support our mission? You can. You can go to our website, gotalktruth.com, click on the donate button. Many different ways you could give digitally there. If you'd like to do it through the mail, you can. You can make a check payable to Heritage Christian Ministries Association and send it to 246 Stewart Green, Southwest, Suite 3260, Calgary, Alberta, T3H 3C8. And if you'd like prayer, you can call our toll-free prayer line, 1-800-915-0056 in Canada, 1-800-445-3450 in the U.S. All right, Dad, we're out of time. We'll see you guys later.
Love you.